Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim. I am joined by Randall and Bill, and we are working hard to put out a lot of scouting reports on a lot of players. But before we get into that, Randall, how you doing today?
Oh, I am doing good. How's everybody doing?
So how about
I
you,
am
Bill?
doing fantastic. I'm ready to talk some wide receivers, ready to talk some corners, get into this class and get into the nitty-gritty of some of these folks.
Okay, so our first player up is going to be Kyren Lacy, and he is the wide receiver. I will add that in right here. Forgot to do that. Wide receiver from LSU. So what do you want to tell us about Kyren Lacy, Bill?
All right, so I'll dive in. So Kyren Lacy, 6'2", 213 from LSU. Watching him, the big thing that I really love is he's got a really nuanced and developed release package. He really can handle press coverage well. He gets in and out of his footwork very quickly, deals with hand fighting very well. Not only that, once he gets off the line, he's a really polished route technician. It's a weird thing when you look in this class. You see a lot of guys that have issues with running routes, especially in how crisp they are. But Kyren very, very well demonstrates good stem work in his routes. In addition to that, he tracks the ball very well over his shoulder, especially on those deep throws from Nussmeier. He's also got soft hands. He plucks the ball away from his frame. He lives in the intermediate zone, 10 to 20 yards deep on crossers, slants. That is his bread and his butter. The biggest knocks for me, though, is he does have a little bit of average long speed. He's not a burner like some of the other guys that we talked about. In addition to that, even though he's very nuanced in route running, he still struggles to find opens in the zone, especially when Nussmeier goes into scramble drill mode and he's got to find that open hole. He still struggles with that a little bit. There's also questions about his production and his consistency. For every game where he blows up and has multiple catches, there's a one-catch game on his radar. So teams are going to be looking at that and wondering if it's going to be a big boom or bust type of prospect. When I look at Kyren Lacy, I have a fourth-round grade on him right there, right at the start of day 3. Could rise as we move through this bowl season. Reminds me a lot of Allen Robinson from the Lions, Giants, Rams, and that same kind of big body concept receiver, really good route runner. Not going to light the world on fire with his speed, but can do really good things, especially to get open with his routes. But Randall, what do you see from Kyren?
A lot of the same for sure. Speed I do have is my number one issue. I do really love his route running, and you are right about those intermediate. He had a catch in Ole Miss, which they don't use in LSU a lot, but where he was in pre-snap motion and right side to left side on a 15-yard dig inside and was wide open. That's pretty much, I think, what you're talking about with his bread and butter on those intermediate routes. Am I right?
Yep, you are spot on.
For sure. But I mean, there's a lot of impressive things, and then there's a couple things that worry me, of course. I do really like that he is basically excelling in all his academics. He's getting academic awards, and LSU acknowledges that in his football IQ and things along those lines. His stats are impressive, especially when you put it as last year. In a room with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., he still caught 7 touchdowns. I know it was Jane Daniels, but it's still impressive to take 7 touchdowns away from those 2 wide receivers. Anytime he has 8 or more targets, he pretty much gets in a 100-yard game, which is impressive. Out of those 100-yard games, 3 of them were against USC, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. So big time competition. He shows up, sort of thing, which I love. His route running is good, but he needs his route running to create the separation. At the line of scrimmage, he is handsy and he does use his hands really well. But then at that stem, if he doesn't use his aggression, cornerbacks can mirror him kind of easy. So I'd like to see him be able to use that stem in aggression and route running to kind of separate on, because his speed can kill him off that stem. If he does not gain that separation, he doesn't have that speed to separate himself, and that route is kind of gone, sort of thing. I didn't see much of a great blocking technique on him. I feel like he just kind of stands tall and doesn't use his weight and leverage on it, to where one or two things can fix that, and NFL can kind of coach him out of it. But he does have to work on some blocking. I have him as a late day 2, early day 3 right now. but I am curious. I mean, I'm looking at Kyren Lacy, and I like what he does and what he did at LSU. But that 6'2", 213 build, there's kind of a lot of them in this draft, and I'm curious as to like when people start picking up those X receivers that are 6'2", 200, and then where that kind of breaks off, because then maybe people start looking at the smaller, quicker guys, and then when do people start coming back to that position when they need it? So that's where my curiosity. And Bill, I was kind of wondering what you kind of thought in that department. Like, where does that group fall when they're not in the group of the big superstar 6'2s, right?
Right, exactly. So you have your guys that are your Ted McMillans of the world, that are the big body guys that do a lot of great things, and then you have your Kyren Lacy's of this draft that are bigger, 6'2", 6'3", and they do a couple of things really well, but they don't light the world on fire. So that's the big question that you have to ask. I think we're going to see probably a big bulk run, probably right around the turn that Randall talked about, late third, early fourth, middle of the fourth round, right at that day 3 start. Because we're going to see this draft's going to ebb and flow. There's going to be a lot of speedster guys. Then we're going to turn around and we're going to go to a big body guy. Then we're going to come back for speedster guys. We're going to go for big body guys. Because there's some teams like Kansas City. They went Xavier Worthy last year, true speedster. Maybe they need this more possession receiver guy. Whereas you have a guy maybe like the Giants or the Bills, for example, that have the big body guy already, but need more of that speedster type. So it's really going to depend on who's on the board. So that's where I think it's going to kind of break up and chop up. But I think if I'm looking at Kyren Lacy and I'm a GM at the top of day 3, and I'm looking and I'm seeing, okay, I have Kyren Lacy, I have a couple of small speedsters, and my roster needs a speedster, I might be more tempted to wait and take a guy like Lacy because I know he runs routes really well for me. Whereas the speedster guys might not do a lot of great things, and they're already undersized to begin with.
Yeah, and I think, Randall, one other thing I would add, I think you are, let's say, hitting the sweet spot. There's a sweet spot in rounds 3 through 5 where we're probably going to see about 10 wide receivers go off the board in a span of 64 picks, halfway through round 3 to halfway through round 5. Like, just as players are being graded, that seems to be the sweet spot, right? Definitely. And then what I heard, like, as I've read on Kyren Lacy, and I've definitely read plenty about the route running, everything I was reading reminded me of Robert Brooks. Like, how close is his game to, like, Robert Brooks, when he came out of USC, was a good route runner, polished receiver, but he's not a burner. Now, Robert Woods went at the top of round 2, though.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
right.
That was who popped into my head. But
no, that's a good one, to be honest.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the big thing too is you look at it on average, teams are going to be taking probably 2 to maybe 3 wide receivers in that day 3 range, that rounds 3 through 7 range. So you could probably get a burner early and come back and get a Kyren Lacy late, or take Lacy early and come back and get a burner late. So I just think we're that deep in this wide receiver class, which is we're covering them all.
Right.
Yep. And I think the other point there would be, this is such a defensive heavy draft. There's going to be a lot of value at wide receiver there sitting at round 4.
Yeah,
I think. But let's jump to our next guy, Jalen Royals, wide receiver from Utah State. So, Bill, what do you got?
Jalen Royals, the small school special, Utah State, 6 foot, 200, 205, right in that range where I've got him. The exact opposite of what we just talked about in Kyren Lacy. Jalen Royals has got blazing track speed, running a 4.38. Probably could run even faster. In addition to that, not only does he have that speed, he's also able to stack corners vertically and just blow by them at the line of scrimmage. He's a very natural hands catcher, excels in contested catch situations. My goodness, I love him when a corner's right on top of him. There's at least a couple of games this season where I've seen him multiple times, Randy Mossing quarterbacks that just jaw drop to the floor. In addition to that, he also demonstrates a really good acceleration off the line of scrimmage, as well as can throttle it back down when he needs to, especially on curl routes, in breaking and out breaking routes. He also has a really good understanding of finding soft spots within the zone. So when his quarterback goes into scramble drill, he has a really good idea of, okay, I need to be in this area to help my quarterback out. The big knocks on his scouting report for me is that there is limited experience against elite competition. So we're talking about a level of competition concern with Jalen Royals. He also does need to develop his route tree a little bit, especially in the short game. Intermediate and long game, they're fine. They could use some work too, but the short game, short slants, drags, a team taking advantage of that and that track speed. There are some concentration drops that I've seen from him, some very easy catches that he should make that easily drop to the field, drop to the floor. All that being said, I do have Jalen Royals as a day 3 guy. He's in that top 175 for me, right around round 6 is where I feel comfortable with a guy like Jalen Royals prior to his postseason Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, which I believe he just accepted an invite for the Senior Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. He reminds me a lot of John Brown mixed with Malachi Corley from last year's class. Really physical guy, good speedster. So a best of both worlds type of scenario. Randall, what do you have on Mr. Royals?
Yeah, I'm very curious when the combine hits what his vertical is going to be as well with those contested catches. And in high school, he cleared a 76-inch high jump. So his vertical is going to be nuts. You're right about the contested catches in 2023. He caught 17 he had 17 contested catches targets and caught 74% of them. So literally 3 out of 4 catches, he is catching those just plain 500, which is insane. I really do like his route running. It's very savvy. He does need to work on some of those expansions, but at the stem of the route, he can burn DBs. His yards per route run was 3 flat, which is super impressive. I know it is Utah State, so they are using him a lot when it comes down to it. To be honest, the best tape that I had for him was probably when he played against Boise State. The Boise State game was probably the best. His touchdown was super impressive, where he separated from that trip set, physical off the DB the whole entire time, broke off on his speed, and literally a walk-in touchdown. I believe I posted a video of when he burned him on that side, and then it took him no more than 3 to 4 yards to get 4 yards of separation. That's how fast that quick speed was. I do like, he's 6 foot. 6 foot 205. So he does use that 205 in his game a lot, which I like. He can be physical. He can separate with being physical, but that's only at the stem. So press, I believe he needs to work at press man's going to be difficult for him in the NFL, and that will be a little rough. That's why he can probably start as a situational, and he is willing to block downfield, but again, at the line of scrimmage, he's not so great at it, so that's an issue as well. I have him in the top 75 without a doubt. I think he fit perfectly with Buffalo, Washington. I think he'd do really well in Dallas as well to help out on the other side as well. So I think the way he plays, a lot of teams want somebody like that, and especially in this draft. So he will go. That top 175 can knock down to top 125 for me by the end of the year.
Yep. No, I'd be curious to see how Jalen does in the combine, especially in the cross-field drill where you're running across the field, catching passes on both sides. Because he's got, especially when he turns that corner, that's why I would love to see a team that drafts him use him in the screen game and use him in those jet sweeps because he's got speed. He turns the corner. It is 6. But you just don't see Utah State run that a lot because he's so well at contested catches. Why give him the ball in space?
Yeah, and they definitely have moved a little bit towards that. In 2023, he was used out wide a lot, and then they moved him more into the slot in 2024. And it kind of took away a little bit on a statistical standpoint. Because in 2023, he broke 1,000 and got 15 touchdowns, so that's relatively insane. But they moved him into the slot, and you can see that he's kind of learning. I think he is expanding that route tree, and I think Utah State did him that service of putting him more in the slot to make him more NFL caliber, which I do appreciate in that point. So I do think that he is learning to grow in that department, and people will see that.
Didn't he lead the nation in receiving last year?
I believe
I don't think 1K would have, would it?
No, it wouldn't have. It wouldn't have let it
This
last
isn't
year.
okay. Because there's somebody in this year's draft that actually had more than Neighbors or Harrison, like more catches, more yards. I thought it was Royals.
Yeah, because I know last year he had just over 1K. It was 1,023 for last year.
Ignore the moderator. I have it on the wrong player. But I was in a chat with somebody and they were stat scouting, like, how come this guy is not on the list for the podcast? And I'm like, well, do you know who led the nation in receiving last year? Because it wasn't Neighbors and it wasn't Harrison. It was somebody in this year's class. And I thought it was Royals, but I'll get that. I'll get the name. When you guys are discussing the next one, I'll go.
Let's see. Roma Dunze was number 1 last year at 1640.
Was
Ricky White is 3rd, though.
Thank
right
you.
Behind
And
Malik Neighbors.
I think we're covering White on the next episode, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
I got Royals and White mixed up. That was my bad. I got Royals and White mixed up. My bad.
No worries.
Okay. So are we going to let Bill start out with Randall's guy, or Randall, you want to introduce your guy?
Randall, I'm gonna let you take the floor on Savion Williams to start because he is your guy, and I don't want to go poking holes in his game.
Let's pump the brakes on the quote unquote my guy. I like Savion Williams a little bit more than I believe the jury that is out for him, sort of thing. But I swear I wrote up this piece for you, Bill, because I put all his negatives in there to show you that I'm not trying to be super biased, and then combat it with all his positives. All right, so Savion Williams, TCU. This man is 6'5", 225 pounds, and he will probably run a 4.45 40, which is insane. Enormous frame. Also played quarterback in high school, which I kind of love, to be honest, which also makes sense. And then he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list, which we've discussed before. You are big, strong, fast, and can do everything. On that list, obviously I didn't pull everything, but it says as a rumor is that he threw a ball 80 yards clean. So I'm curious about that too. He's super fast for his size, has a long speed to DBs on vertical routes. TCU in the past 4 games, in which a lot of people saw it early and was hoping TCU would do it, but they unlocked his rushing capabilities. He has 5 games with over 5 carries, 1 game with 11 carries, which went for 72 and a touchdown, and that was against Texas Tech. The touchdown was very impressive. He broke a tackle, and then as he was falling down, Josh Allen, at the Chiefs game, spun around the other DB, and then just took off for a touchdown. Super impressive. His stats are, pretty average. You have 54 catches at 583 yards, but that 583 yards, 300 of 83 are yards after catch. So he is catching and running. You can tell that run after catch is probably the best thing that he has, to be honest with you, because once he gets that ball, it's like a road runner in a cartoon sort of thing. It's very impressive. Even though he's 6'5", the reason he has so much yards after catch is actually forced missed tackles. He can actually juke out his DB instead of using a bruiser. If you're looking at those big wide receivers, like coming in like Luther Burden or Deebo Samuel when he was in South Carolina, Xavier Legette, they were burners, but they were bruisers. Savion Williams can be a little bit of a bruiser, but he actually just kind of tries to evade people instead. The big knock for him when it comes down, there's a lot of big knocks for him, I apologize, but his route tree is limited. His route tree is limited, to be honest with you. We're talking go routes, slants, and curls when it comes down to it for now. His short routes are clunky because he's 6'5", 225. It's hard for him to stop on a dime. He will never be able to stop on a dime, sort of thing. But with that being said, his short routes on his curls typically do work because, and I'm not sure how this will translate in the NFL, but quarterbacks are playing super soft on him when he's far outside. If he's far outside, they'll give him a curl route and not let him go on that vertical route thing. So he amasses a lot of yards that way. The one thing that my biggest knock for him, which I'm concerned about, is his touchdown production for 6'5", 225, blazing speed. He's got 6 touchdowns, and I believe he had 3 last year. why does not he not have 10 to 12 touchdowns per year personally? I do think TCU didn't use him enough, and then finding out his running game now has unlocked it. So my love for Savion Williams is what he can be, not what he was. So I'm looking at a projection. So when we're talking about where he goes in the draft, I am looking at a late fourth rounder for somebody really risking the development of Savion Williams. I don't think he's a day two. I don't think he'll ever get into day two sort of thing. But I think somebody will either risk or he does really well in the later of the years and then in combine and things along those lines. And then you're just betting on his traits because they're there. His rushing's there. His rushing's great. He looks smaller than 6'5" when he runs, but then he can, beat them out. All right, Bill.
All right.
Find the hole.
Find the holes. So, like we talked about with Savion Williams, it's a big body guy, 6'5", 225. You can't teach size. You can't teach speed. That's the two big things you can't teach. Just like you talked about, he shows potential as a red zone target, but it's almost like when he gets down in the red zone, he forgets that he's 6'5" and plays significantly smaller. I want him to box someone out, and he just forgets about that. He has the frame, he has the athleticism to develop into a solid blocker, but it's like he's shying away from contact without shying away from contact. Like you had mentioned, he just wants to evade somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The big knocks, you already hit it. The route tree is limited. It's slants. I would say curls probably need some work too because of that large size. It's very clunky. It's very disorganized. I would say if it's not a slant or if it's not a go ball, it's not going to work for Savion. And even then, some go balls don't work for him either because he has the vertical to be able to go up and climb the ladder and get it. He just forgets that he's 6'5" and doesn't. It's weird. All the traits are there. He checks every single box that you'd want from a big body X receiver, the speed, the height, the size, even the hands. But it's just, he hasn't put it all together because for every game, like you talked about, for every Texas Tech game where for every Texas game where he blows up 11 catches, 164 yards, he turns around and follows it up with an SMU game where he doesn't get any catches, or an Iowa State game where it's 2 catches for 17 yards. It's so mercurial in his production. The traits should show me a guy that's leading the nation in receiving yards, should show me a guy that has double-digit touchdowns. It doesn't line up. And that's what's concerning to me. We talked about his running mate, Jack Beck, a couple of weeks back, and it seems like in the same offense, Beck has less traits and is somehow more productive, which is probably the most annoying thing for me for Savion. All that being said, I think he's a good project if someone wants to take him. I don't have a draftable grade on him right now. He's not on my draft board at this time. As we move through the combine and the senior bowls and the shrine bowls, I'm sure that somebody's going to see a 6'5", 225 guy who runs a 4.4 that can throw a football 80 yards and is going to say, it's going to be like the old Al Davis. Hey, he's fast, he's strong, he's quick. I'm going to take him 7th overall. Sorry, Raiders fans.
Yeah.
So I think Julian Edelman went in like round 6 or 7, right? Like he was
right.
Late round guy. So I think he's going to get drafted because of traits. If you're sitting at round, and Randall and I are Bills fans, right? Whenever Brandon Beane submits like a 7th round pick, and then we have to go, figure out who did he take. It's always somebody that is traits, but they didn't put it all together. Right. So to me, that's what I heard as I heard the two of you discussing Williams. I think between the kickoff rule and the fact that you're going to save a roster spot with him. So if Taysom Hill is able to play tight end and quarterback, right? And he's essentially saving New Orleans a roster spot, right? That's my argument would be, Hill is a 3rd tight end and he's QB2 off the bench.
Yeah.
There's a goal line package for Williams. You're going to be, is he going to run wildcat or is he going to split out wide? They would cause a problem in the red zone just to match up.
Right. And he takes direct snaps now all the time and things along those lines. So he's doing that. So my 2 places that I think that he should land, first of all, number one is the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh would use him, develop him, teach him, turn him into NFL caliber without a doubt. They need wide receivers. They need running backs, all the above. And then my other random one, because I believe, because Jets are now flipping everything, is since they have Braylon Allen as an RB2, is they should trade Breece Hall for picks, and then grab Savion, help Braylon in the running game with Savion, and then also out wide, and then use him in that type of package where Jets could. It's not clearly it's not 1-for-1, but Jets got to start getting capital somehow and start revamping. I wouldn't want to get rid of Garrett Wilson, but I would consider Breece Hall.
Yeah. And I'll even go one further. I'll stay in the AFC East, and we always talk about it. We talked about it several times. The track meet in South Beach.
Yeah.
Like give Miami and Mike McDaniel, give Tua a Savion Williams that he can throw on the outside, or maybe even use him as a power slot and just throw a go ball 60 yards down the field, go get under it. And I think that'd be a good fit for him. But I don't think right now he has enough production and enough traits from a route running standpoint for me to consider him as a draftable player. He's going to be one of the guys that I'm going to watch in those one-on-ones at the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl, those bowl games, because I'm going to want to see something. Not to say he won't make an NFL roster. I just wouldn't spend one of my 7 picks on him right now.
And Nick Nash, another player, I believe, is it San Jose State?
Yes. So Nick Nash, San Jose State. So 6'3", 196, 195. This guy is a baller. He has legitimate deep threat playability, really great hands, really lengthy frame. He's got a good feel for leverage, especially in press coverage. He has a lot of experience. He has a lot of production. I mean, he's out there throwing up Madden scores in terms of statistics in some of his games. And he goes out there and you see him. He's such a dynamic athlete. He lines up in the slot more frequently than most, but he also can play out wide. He has that size. When we talk about his production, some of the great games, just throwing out stat lines, Kennesaw State, 17 catches, 225 yards, 3 touchdowns. Washington State, 16 catches, 152 yards, 2 touchdowns. Even just this past week versus Boise, 9 catches, 126 yards and a touchdown. He produces. Yes, it's against teams against San Jose State is at top level caliber, not necessarily. He also does the thing on tape that kind of annoys me a little bit. On the short to intermediate routes, he plays taller than what he should. So it's almost like he's playing 6'4", 6'5". But once he's playing taller, he's giving up that leverage to defenders. So he can't break away from those catches. It's a small thing that I've noticed here recently. I went back further in the tape to find it. I haven't seen it. It's mostly popped up this season, but it is a question mark for me. With that said, Nick Nash is in my top 175. He is the guy that I would spend a draft pick on. Right around the round 6 range for me. I compared him to a taller version of T.Y. Hilton from the Indianapolis Colts. Same kind of guy. You could throw him in the slot. You could throw him outside. He's going to produce. He's going to be that safety blanket for your wide receiver. I've seen a lot of Puka Nacua comparisons too, just because it's a small school guy that comes up to the next level and produces. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can see it. It's kind of that same frame and size and production. But ultimately, I think this is a guy that NFL GMs, especially as we move into Shrine and All-Star games, they're going to fall in love with the Nick Nash, and they're going to go back and see all that production. But that's enough of me pounding the table for Nick Nash. Randall, what do you see from Mr. Nash?
Just more pounding of the table. So obviously, former QB and a wide receiver. QB wasn't awful. He had 75 completions on 140 throws for over 1,000 yards, and then he was a dual threat that rushed for 425 times in 2021. So that dual threat, obviously, he started trying to move over to wide receiver. Started being a true wide receiver in 2023, and then he's going off. Now, I would probably guess that he's leading in targets this year, correct? Because he's got 151 targets. I didn't see anybody that's beating that at the moment. So he's getting fed a million times, but that doesn't take away that he's about to get 100 catches. He's at 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns. and he works as a QB into a wide receiver. He works in the slot 95% of the time, which I do love because his route recognition for zone is so good to where those yards, I mean, it almost kind of looks easy sometimes. And then when he's working difficult, it's those contested catches, and which he does very well. He only accounts for 6 drops on 151 targets. That's insane. Has really good slants. His double moves are good. He does use his body for leverage on the inside outside. So when CBs turn those hips, he'll dictate that leverage, which I love. And you're right. It comes down to competition, who he played. He did post. It was last week. He played Boise State. I got to watch that game live, fortunately. And that was, he still posted 9-126 and a touchdown. That was solid. The week before that, he did Oregon State 6-161 with a touchdown. So that's a better competition when we're discussing it, but I do agree. It's kind of almost like I'm thinking back to last year with Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey, Rice, quarterback into wide receiver. Luke McCaffrey was pretty much the same size, right? 6'2", 195 sort of thing, same style. He had 120 targets in his last year, 71 receptions, 13 touchdowns, 1,000 yards sort of thing. There's very similarities to what Luke McCaffrey at Rice was doing and Nick Nash and how they developed. He went, end of the third, right? I believe right before day 3, yep. He went end of the third. And he is carving out a role in Washington. It's just taking a little bit more time. So I have no problem with any team adding Nick Nash to it with maybe a partial developmental year in year 1 and let him explode in year 2. I have him in no doubt the 175 leaning into the 125. And I would love to see him go to somewhere like Detroit, especially with a team that loves to use trick plays as well with its quarterback experience. I think that would be a lot of fun. I also had the Broncos and the Raiders.
Nice. Okay.
I like that Broncos fit. I really do. I think that'd be a good fit for him.
So the last wide receiver.
All right. Next on the docket. Yeah, we'll wrap up with the Ohio State star Emeka Egbuka, 6'1", 206. He is a very good technician when setting up his breaks on the in routes and the out routes. He will make defenders. He'll shake them out of their shoes, as I like to call it. Very crafty head fakes. He can throttle up and throttle down with good tempo changes as well. He's also a natural hands catcher. He plucks the ball away from his frame, out in space. You don't have to worry about body catches with him. He does show juice as a return specialist, especially with vision in the open field. You see a lot of times, especially on his tape, you watch him take a couple of steps back, and you're like, why is he running backwards? And then all of a sudden he cuts it upfield for another 7 or 8 yards because he has that almost ball carrier-like vision. He shows a very good competitive toughness as a blocker, sustains, drives. He's probably one of the best blocking wide receivers in this class with how well he blocks in the run game. He also has shown proven production against press coverage, proven production against top-level talent. He also really does really well, especially against zone coverage and finding that space for his quarterback to find him. The big thing is I do have a red flag on his medicals. 2023, he missed 3 games with lower body injuries that affected his explosion. It seemed like it took a little bit longer in 2023 for him to heal from that and get going. So it's going to be a question on his medicals. For me, I have it as a red push pin because I'm going to want to see how he does in these bowl games and this postseason. In addition to that, he can get muscled by more physical corners, especially in press coverage situations. They can push him off his route a little bit easier, which is pretty surprising considering how physical he is. He also doesn't really have that build-up speed on vertical routes. He doesn't have that 5th gear, that 6th gear. It's pretty much 4th gear, and then he's redlining. All that being said, I think he is a guy that I would take probably in my top 75, right around early parts of round 3. Reminds me a lot of Jerry Jeudy from the Cleveland Browns when Jerry Jeudy played. That same style, more of a physical receiver, really good catcher, not going to light the world on fire with the speed, but he has that top gear, that 4th gear that can push past some corners and some safeties, but not all of them. Randall, what do you see from Emeka?
Yeah, to be honest, in a quick summary is I saw Ohio State's pumping out another Jackson Smith and Jigba. I see that slot presence. I mean, it's almost uncanny. Ohio State found another Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I love because I love JSN and what he's becoming in Seattle as well. I know he had a tougher battle to get past Lockett and DK Metcalf and stuff, but now he's really coming into his own. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, because he had the high ankle sprain in which in the offseason he got the tightrope surgery. And if I'm not mistaken, tightrope surgery is a new trendy surgery that actually improves and sustains those injuries. So I do believe, I don't have a medical flag on him for that reason. I did some research on the tightrope surgery, and it is a new trendy research that seems like a lot of people are either opting into it on that to actually almost avoid some high ankle sprains in the future. So in my head right now, which I'll try and debunk myself before the offseason thing like that, I think that surgery actually will help him in the long run. So I actually don't have a medical flag on him. But I mean, other than that, I kind of saw whatever you did. He's an all-around guy. He's, to be honest, like a lunch pail guy in the offense sort of thing. He'll block. He lined up as a tight end once to actually block on the line sort of thing. That's what kind of wide receiver he is. And and he should be just kind of coveted by a lot. For me, he's actually the wide receiver 3 in the draft for me. If you take away Travis Hunter, because I'll put him in the cornerback market. So I'll go Tat, Luther, then Emeka, to be honest with you, because I love his all-around presence, and I believe that he can contribute really well in the NFL from day one.
Do you have him over Bond?
I do. Yeah, okay. I like his willingness to do everything, size a little bit higher, and just Emeka can be just as fast.
Okay.
I'm a little further down on the board than you are. I'm wide receiver 8. He's still in my top 10 wide receivers, but he's a little bit further down the board for me. I mean, I have guys, Ty Felton from Maryland, Xavier Restrepo, Bond, like Jim had mentioned, and even guys like Alec Iomanner and Torrey Horton from Colorado State ahead of him, just because I have that concern, like we talked about with the tightrope surgery. I'm not so much concerned with the surgery aspect of it, but it seemed like it took him longer to recuperate than it should have. And I have not a medical doctor by any means, but it seems like him taking the experimental surgery and it taking longer to recuperate wasn't the smartest decision from his aspect, because when he finally did recover, it seemed like it took him longer to get going, and almost the 2023 season was pretty much washed out because of it.
Right.
So if you were to draft him, do you think he is the featured receiver in an offense, or do you think he's the wide receiver 2 or the Robin to somebody else's Batman?
I go Robin.
I'm with you. I go Robin. I don't think he can be a Batman in a featured offense just because he doesn't have that necessarily fifth gear to pass those wide receivers. But he'd be a really great Robin. Do not get me wrong. I would say he would be a Robin like Jordan Addison and T. Higgins are Robins. They're guys that
Tyler Lockett, to be honest.
Yes.
Tyler Lockett's so dependable, and that's what I see in Emeka, is the dependability of knowing he's going to run his routes, the timing's going to be right, he'll be willing to block, and he never really puts himself in harm's way either when it comes down to that. So I think he's just a reliable person that's a perfect Robin. So that was perfectly said, Jim.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so before we switch to defensive backs, we would like to thank everybody that is watching the podcast and do a quick commercial break. Please follow Randall on Twitter at Randall Slifer. Follow Bill on Twitter at Spark Scouting. Follow me on Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I in Fanatic. Like the YouTube video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have draft content every day. This channel is covering between 40 and 80 players every week on podcasts just like this. So you want to find running backs, linebackers, show up Monday. You want to learn about tight ends, find us on Tuesday. You want to learn about some hog mollies, that's Wednesday and Thursday on both sides of the line. And then we finish on Fridays with wide receivers and corners with Bill and Randall. So the This Is Our Relevant podcast is every day. We appreciate everybody that is watching right now. And just please like, follow, subscribe, find us on Twitter, interact with our content on Twitter, and we will be sure to cover those players. If you say, well, I want to know more about this guy, we'll spend a few minutes, watch some film, and come back to you a week later and see what we can come up with. So thank you very much. And let's transition that to Mr. Cobee Bryant from Kansas.
All right.
Bill, what do you want to tell us?
So Cobee Bryant from Kansas, 6 foot, 170, 175. The big thing that I love about Cobee Bryant is that he has really exceptional ball skills and instincts. He always knows when to be around the ball, create turnovers, momentum-changing plays. He shows really fluid hips. He can turn and run with some of the best receivers in this class. I think he has a very quick change of direction, meaning he's going to do very well in man situations. He's one of those guys. He's a my guy for me. He is one of the my guys of this class that I'm banging the table for, just because I cannot wait to see him in the bowls, all-star season, in the one-on-ones. I believe Kansas plays Colorado this weekend as well. So I'm really excited to see him go one-on-one with Travis Hunter in that aspect. It is going to be cinema, as they say in the X space. He's very versatile as well. He can play outside, he can play slot, and that's going to increase his value. He also has special teams experience. He has a touchdown off of a blocked kick. We get to the negatives because it's not all sunshine and rainbows for Cobee Bryant. He is very light, 6 foot, 170 pounds, and I can tell you, looking at some of his tape, it looks like he might be lighter than that. That's going to give very concerning things for GMs, because they're going to say, number one, is durability a question mark, which I have not seen, but it's going to be in the back of their mind. If I have a guy that's 165 pounds matching up against a DK Metcalf, number one, can he stay healthy for that matchup? Number two, is he going to get pushed around in that matchup? He has no fear in mixing it up in the run game because of his light size, but his tackling technique does need to be worked on. Too many times there's too many arm tackles, too many shoulder tackles, rather than wrapping a guy up. And right now, where he's at in the Big 12, that's acceptable. But when you get to the next level and every wide receiver is 200 plus, it's going to be an issue. In addition to that, with his undersized frame, I also have concerns about him in the run game. And from a blocking perspective, I don't know if he can hold up on those blocks, if he has to block some of the larger corners in the league. All that being said, though, I really love Cobee Bryant's game. And I really think that he is one of these guys, despite that size. It's going to be like the Nate Wiggins conversation that we had in this past draft cycle from Clemson, where everyone had conversations about his size, but then he ended up in Baltimore and had a really great start to his season. I have him as an early round 3 guy. Reminds me a lot of Kendall Fuller from Kansas City and Washington, that same mold of the smaller cornerback that you probably put in the slot, but if you need to throw him outside, you can. But he's going to be a really good guy for you. He's going to be a dog for you. But Randall, what did you see about Cobee from Kansas?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very sound baller. And before I start, I have a question, because I couldn't figure out and I couldn't see on the internet. Does he have the frame to add mass? Would you like to see him at a certain weight?
I would. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. I'd love to see him at about 10 pounds. If he can get to the 180 mark, I think that's a green light for go.
Yeah, I saw, I had him at 175, and I wanted to see him at between 180 and 185. That's where I was at. So I agree, yeah. But honestly, Cobee Bryant's becoming also into one of my guys as well, kind of watching him, just because of how much of a sound baller is. Anything you ask of him, he can kind of do, to be honest with you. I do love his tackling and run support. I do agree that he needs to work on his tackling. I do see a lot of time where he just kind of when you talk about the shoulder tackles, it almost sometimes kind of looks like he's using all his body to tackle him, because he knows he's a smaller frame. So he's like, let's play it safe and just throw myself at you so you fall down, sort of thing, which won't work in the NFL. You are right. But the turnover machine is something that I love. This year he has 4 interceptions, only allowing 1, with an NFL passer rating of 59 when targeted. That block kick was awesome to see. He has the 4.4 speed for long coverage, but he does have that IQ, and he plays in the box, he plays in the slot, he plays in the corner. And from what I've seen in interviews and what people have talked about him, it's because of his IQ. He's got a good football IQ, so he's ready. He had I can't remember who said it, but he said he has an NFL caliber IQ already, sort of thing, and that's what kind of turned my head when I was listening to some interviews. Um, my knock on him, other than his size, is his penalties. He likes to draw penalties, and sometimes unnecessary penalties. 2023, he had 7 penalties. This year, he's up to 5 already. There was a kind of the yin and yang of Cobee Bryant, which there's a much more. I actually don't know which one's good. Is Yin good? Yin's good, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I don't think it matters.
Does it not matter?
Yeah,
I didn't know if one was like, yeah, but the yin and yang was like, I was watching the Kansas State game in 2023 because I wanted to see if in the progress he played soft man on the outside. Guy was bigger than him, but wide receiver came on a double move and he didn't get burned. He read it and he went into a trail technique. Trail technique went great. Everything was going fine. The ball was going out of bounds, so the ball wasn't catchable, but he held him and grabbed him down. So he didn't get the PI because the ball was not catchable, but it was a very unnecessary penalty, especially when he can do the trail technique very well, sort of thing. And he can do that with the long speed. So if he can just get the grab down and tackling technique, I think he is an NFL caliber cornerback, ready to rock and roll. Late day 2 for me. Where did you have him?
I had him early round 3, so right in the middle of day 2.
Yeah, right now I have him at that end, so that 90 range, but I wouldn't be surprised if he jumps up fast.
So, couple things I think on that as we're looking at corners. I don't think this is a cornerback class that has quantity on day 2. So an average draft is 3 corners round 1, 3 corners round 2, and then it usually bumps up to 5 on round 3. So if you add that up, that's 11 that go on day 1 or 2. I don't think we're going to see 11 corners go on day 1 and 2 this year. So
I agree.
If he has the athletic ability to play and a team needs a corner, they're probably going to reach for him on day 2 because they may not have the chance to get him on day 3, even if it's early round 4. So I think any corner that has even just a little bit of ability to play, and like it sounds like all the athletic check marks are there, it's just the size. That's a prospect that's probably going to be taken in this draft class. If a team needs a corner, like they're hurting for a starter, there's something to be said that he could play his way into a starting job during training camp.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And we've talked about it on this last too, is not only does it seem a little bit more shallow in that day 2, day 3 range, but even the guys at the top, Ben Morrison with his hip and shoulder surgery, Siobhan Revel with ACL injuries. Even you go to some guys like Maxwell Hairston who have had injury concerns. Even some of these guys that we would say are day 1, day 2 talents don't have clean bills of health. So now you have that conversation of, do we have to take this guy that maybe not necessarily healthy and run the risk of him not playing at all his rookie season? So I think that's another thing that's going to help him out. That's probably going to push the frame question further down the list for an NFL GM.
So we have another, let's say, smallish corner, 185. So what can you tell us about Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech, Bill?
So Dorian Strong, so 6'1", 185 is right about where I've got him as well. He, like Cobee Bryant, has exceptional coverage skills. He really excels in press man coverage, which is pretty surprising considering his size, but he has the length to be able to keep those receivers at bay. And he's got very heavy hands to establish leverage, especially in those press coverage situations. He also has very fluid hip flexibility, like Randall talked about, being able to run that trail technique, turn and run with those wide receivers. Dorian Strong can do that in stride and in spades. He also really has very good play speed, which allows him to effectively trail those receivers in those short and intermediate games. So you don't have to worry about them getting out in front of him very easily, unless it's an Xavier Worthy or Isaiah Bond who gets in front of everybody very easily. He also does have a very good length that allows him to play larger than his frame. So you look even in the picture that you've got pictured here, even though he's 6'1", he's got a pretty long arm there. So that's another thing that I like. But now we get to the negatives on Dorian Strong. He is undersized. 185 is still light. but it's better than a Cobee Bryant, but it's still a conversation piece. You're 6'1", 185 going up against a DK Metcalf. You're going to Jackson Smith-Njigba. There's going to be concerns about you being able to hold up. I would like to see him be more physical, especially at the top of routes, top of the curl routes, top of the in-breaking, out-breaking. It seems like he just shies away from that contact, which is pretty concerning and questioning because it seems like he's physical everywhere else in press, just not at the top of those routes. This is a beige flag for me. He is not engaged in run support at all. If it were up to him, he wouldn't be on the field for run support. I've seen a lot of plays where he just lightly throws himself at defenders, takes a bad angle, just takes himself right out of it. So that's a beige flag for me. I think all that being said, for Dorian Strong, he is not in my top 175 because even though he has the ball skills, he has his size, which is a check mark against him. The fact that he's under engaged in run support is another check mark against him. So I already have 2 strikes on him. The third strike is it seems like he only wants to be physical when he's in press situations, and outside of that, he doesn't really want to seem engaged. So I think he could make an NFL roster, especially on special teams, practice squads, camps, things like that. I would not spend one of my 7 draft picks on a Dorian Strong. Reminds me a lot of Kyle Fuller when he came out of Chicago in that same aspect of very physical but not great in run support. So he was almost you put him on the field on passing downs and nickel situations and kind of washed himself out of the league. And I know it's a little bit more on the somber side of things, but it shows that certain corners have certain flaws in their game, and we want to be able to cover all of them, the good and the bad, here on the This Is Irrelevant podcast. But Randall, what'd you see about Dorian that I might have missed?
Yeah, to quickly piggyback on the effort sort of thing when we're going with those is, man, I don't even know if it's a beige flag, it's the yellow, getting close to red sort of thing, because I saw that as well without putting that effort or really having a motor, and especially when plays are on the other side too. So I watched a couple games, and the one thing where I put him draftable was his Miami tape. But the issue with his game in Miami was that very last play when they were down by 3 and Miami got down to the 1 yard line. It was a play on the left side and he was on the right side, and he was, just what Dorian was doing. He was just kind of playing, handing with his wide receiver that was blocking for him. The play came to the right side and he was walking, not prepared for it. And basically the wide receiver blocked him with ease. He was looking for a holding call on it. Clearly didn't get the holding call because it wasn't a holding. But if he had been engaged, the game would have been different right there. They would have been at the 35-yard line for a 52-yard field goal instead of that tight end getting to the 1 yard line. And that was clearly on him right there for the final of that play. Not in the beginning, but he was the reason why they got to the 1 yard line, and it was frustrating to watch. But then when you look at the tape before, he had in the Miami, he had really good coverage against Miami, and it's so off script in Miami, so it was impressive when he was basically put on his island on his side to stop Restrepo and I believe somebody else when they were going in and out. But
Brown, right?
Brown, thank you. Thank you. But he had a really good coverage play where it was zone coverage, and he was following a wide receiver on an inside post. And right at the stem, he recognized the play really quickly and knew that he was going on that inside post. So his football IQ knew what route he was running, knew that he had a safety help to cover that, came down dug his foot into the ground for a flat route, and then played a game of 500 and was a PBU. It was super impressive to watch. Like, I watched that, and then I was like, man, there is something in there for you, man. Like, you can do it. And I was excited to see him to be able to do that. But I think he gets in his own way when it comes down to it. And I'm curious, he had a fractured hand in 2022, didn't play. And then 2023, his coverage was okay. And then 2024, he's getting into it. So I have him watching the Miami game. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody drafted him in that end of 6, 7 to see what you can get out of him sort of thing. But I'm with you that his flags are NFL concerning.
Okay. So let's flip it to Dorian Porter, and I believe Dorian Porter from Iowa State has accepted a Senior Bowl invite.
Yep, you
Right.
are correct. So Dorian Porter from Iowa State, 6'3", 200 on the slide. I've seen him at 6'4" as well. The big thing about him is he's got a good frame. 6'3", 200. He's not like the guys we just talked about that are a little bit on the lighter side. This is an exceptional frame, really good arm length. He's got that wingspan you're going to want to create natural leverages, especially in press coverage, man coverage situations. He is a verified burner. He's got track speed. He's going to be able to keep up with the Xavier Worthies and the Isaiah Bonds of the world. He's got that burner speed, and he really has a great closing burst on the football. Just like Randall talked about with Dorian Strong, this is a guy that can plant his foot in the ground and get after that ball in 0 to 60 in 3 seconds almost, it seems like. I do love him in special teams, really, because he's a very good gunner. He's a great punt box specialist. He's blocked 4 punts over his career at Iowa State, if not more. He also shows a very natural feel in press coverages using his length to redirect receivers. The biggest thing that I love, though, is his back pedal. Taller cornerbacks you typically see kind of stumble over their feet a little bit when they're backpedaling before they turn and run with a wide receiver. You don't see that with Dorian. I think he has probably the smoothest back pedal of any wide receiver taller than 6 foot in this entire class. I know,
100%.
another hot take. Here comes Bill Sparks with his hot takes again. But I think his back pedal is just that smooth. However, he is raw from a starting perspective. It's something that now there's a question of, is this production what we're going to see from him, or is there more to come with Dorian Porter? He does have a little bit stiffer hips, especially against quicker slot receivers. It pops up, especially when he's lined up in the slot and in the nickel. So I think if I'm drafting Dorian, it's going to be solely on the outside, on an outside guy. I've got him as a draftable grade. He's right outside my top 175. I think with the Senior Bowl, he's going to open up a lot of eyes, especially in those one-on-ones and how he deals with using his length against some of those receivers. But it reminds me a lot of like a Michael Davis who played for the Commanders type of cornerback, a really lengthy man coverage type of corner that isn't really good in the slot. He's boundary or bust, as I like to call it, those types of corners. But Randall, what did you see from Dorian Porter at Iowa State?
Yeah, it's crazy, Bill. A lot of your hot takes since we've been doing podcasting, I kind of see it as well. So then I hate to be like, it's not a hot take, sort of, because it generally is. You're right. It's wild that a lot of them I actually agree with. His back pedal's crazy to watch. It's actually really like mesmerizing to watch. Being 6'4" and how low he can get and keep it so fluid is a lot.
So what we're gonna do, Bill, it's no longer a hot take. Yeah. It's the take that people haven't heard yet because we're the first ones covering it.
There we go. We're the breaking news take. That's what we're gonna call it.
There you go. That's perfect.
Carry on, Randall.
Yeah, but yeah, I saw that. My big issue, I love him on special teams. I honestly think that he's getting drafted for special teams to develop as a cornerback sort of thing. He works well in zone. Press can be a little difficult if you're playing press because his back pedal is great, but his hips are not as fluid. And to catch up, he can catch up, but if he lost 1 or 2 yards of separation, then it's kind of over for him. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but I believe it's probably because, he played wide receiver in college and then moved in. It wasn't a high school to college thing. He actually played wide receiver, decided to switch to DB. He's not a great tackler, which it might be because he was a wide receiver sort of thing. So he's still learning how to tackle overall. But for his size, he's not a good tackler at all. And it seems concerning with his size because I'd really like him to use his size in the tackling department. And with that, he kind of doesn't get to play a lot in college as well. At Iowa State, he averages about 37 snaps per game, which is 10th on the team. So he's getting taken out a lot. And since he's a bad tackler, he's getting taken out on known run red zone. And he's not playing those snaps, even if it turns into play action, which is unfortunate because, he can stop any fade, basically. He plays well on those fade routes. So the inexperience scares me. The tackling scares me. The size I love. If you're drafting him in the 7th round, I love him as a special teamer. and then learning in the as a cornerback on the outside. I don't know if he'll be a cornerback in the league, but his special teams is very incredible, to be honest. 4 block punts, and his length, speed, size works.
So
No,
if a player is invited to the Senior Bowl, let's remember that Jim Nagy, who's in charge of the Senior Bowl, is in contact with NFL GMs. So NFL GMs are saying they want to see more of Dorian Porter.
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons he received an invite. I think he's going to be drafted a lot higher than this podcast is indicating. That's going to be my hot take.
All right. Breaking news.
Right.
Breaking news take.
Breaking news tape. Throw it up on the banner.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon, 5'10", 185. The big thing I love about Jabbar Muhammad is he is very strong in zone coverage. Seems like he's got a great awareness to be able to take away designated areas of the field, especially on the short, the intermediate coverages in zone. He can play both inside and outside. He is a guy you can throw him in the slot in the nickel package. You can keep him on the boundary and cover out there as well. He is an open field tackler, and he's very effective at it. He is not afraid to get in there, mix it up, and tackle in the open field. He also has very good ball skills. He can track the ball well. He can force turnovers very well, especially with the peanut punch, as we like to call it. He also has very fluid movement, especially in back pedal and turning his hips. Even though he's a good, effective tackler, I feel like he lacks physicality. He seems kind of hesitant to be a run defender, kind of shying away from that physicality, even though he can do it. He tackles well. His technique is very sound. He just kind of shies away from it. The one thing, it's kind of a beige flag, and I've seen it happen more often than not, is he's very susceptible to double moves and play fakes. It seems like there's at least 1 or 2 plays every game that he's biting on play action, getting caught out of position, and he has the speed to catch back up, but against faster wide receivers in the NFL, it's going to be a problem. He also, even though is a little bit larger than some of the other folks we talked about, his arm length appears to be a little bit smaller. So I have concerns about him being able to handle some of those press coverages. I'm not confident in his man coverage skills. I think he's a better zone coverage guy than a man coverage guy. But all that being said, I think he's very good in zone coverage. I would take him right at the top of round 3. Reminds me a lot of Big Play Slay from Philly. That same kind of corner that's very good in zone coverage, that can pass for man coverage. You don't want him in man one-on-one situations. Has the physicality needed to make the tackle, and the technique just kind of shies away from it. Reminds me a lot of that. But Randall, what do you see from Jabbar Muhammad's tape?
Yeah, the one flag I really did have on him was those double moves. He does bite on them. It's almost like he's like a 50-50 on double moves. He either really understands it or he doesn't, sort of thing. The Boise State game that he played, he had poor coverage on the touchdown. I believe it was the first quarter touchdown. He was playing in the seam route for the seam route, had his hips aligned for it, basically gave him the outside, and it was a quick double move. Wide receiver went outside, caught the ball. It was wide open, sort of thing. Next drive came up, did the same thing, but he actually understood it and mirrored him, same exact route, mirrored him that time. So maybe he kind of learned from that sort of thing. Maybe he just needs to learn each double move or what he's looking for in that wide receiver's shoulders. But that was my flag for him. My favorite thing is watching him is his motor. He is a sideline to sideline guy. He will not stop running on every single time. I know that sometimes when he's at the line of scrimmage, he's not the greatest in run support, but I do love his willingness to do it. He does try to get off his blockers instead of just holding up. And I do see him a couple times dictating where his blocker is going as well. A couple times there was tackle for losses to where he pushed his wide receiver to the right. So on a jet sweep, it kind of dictated where he was going. Put it for like a -1 tackle for loss. So he does give that, and his motor is really what I do love about it. Obviously, press man is not his forte, but he is really good in zone coverage. I'm not crazy concerned about his arm length, and maybe it is in the NFL versus college, but he has pass breakups each year, like out the wazoo, to be honest with you. In 2022, he's had 9 pass breakups. 2023, he had 12. This year, he's got 8 so far. So he's putting his arm, he's on those contested catches and those coverage, those things he's using his arms at all times, sort of thing. So I am a big fan of that. If anybody is watching this and they do have a concern about going from Oklahoma State to Washington to Oregon, I would not worry about that. The only reason he went to Oregon, he did have actually a visit with Alabama, which is interesting and kind of nice as well. But he just wanted to play with a defensive-minded coach, so that's why he went to Oregon. So that is not a flag for me, to be honest, when you see those three schools. I have him as I really like Jabbar Muhammad based on his motor and how he is in zone coverage and what he can do in press man. So I can't dictate exactly where he goes. So I'm just putting him in the 50 to 100 range for now. And then I want to see where he ends up. Because I think he has a lot of volume to it. I think he can get in the late second round if he does really well in the offseason the rest of the year. And we'll kind of go from there. I mean, they should be one seed in the playoffs. That'll be very interesting to see him play.
Absolutely. Where do you think his best fit is as far as an NFL franchise?
Let's see. I think he would work. I mean, he would work very well in Buffalo, but we're not using a cornerback in the top 100 because his zone, and we don't really use press that much. I could see him working in Philly. I think that would work. Where would you put him?
So Philly's one of the places that I would put him. There are two others. Arizona with Jonathan Gannon, who brings that Philly scheme out west as well. And then the other one, just because I like to see cornerbacks and Brian Flores' scheme, and I think Minnesota's thrown enough draft capital at quarterbacks. Minnesota. I think he would do very well in the back end of Flores' scheme where he doesn't necessarily have to worry about press coverage as much. He can just sit back in zone and watch that defensive line get after him. But I think Arizona and Philly would probably be the top two landing spots for Muhammad if I'm his team and his agent of where I would want my player to go.
Cool. So I believe. Oh, okay. We do have one more. Okay. So I was thinking that was the last one. No, this is the last one. Mr. Justin Walley from Minnesota. So Bill, take it away.
Yep, big finish here. Justin Walley from Minnesota, 5'11", 190. Very, very good athlete. Quick twitch, very fluid hip turns, very smooth transition, and he can effectively mirror receivers very well. Probably one of the best in this class to be able to stick and move and mirror with some receivers. I do also love his natural feel for zone coverage. He seems to know right where the routes are breaking off, right where the stems are in the routes, and where receivers are going. He also does have a very stout frame, 5'11", 190, so he's one of the bigger guys that we've talked about. It's in the photo there, but he very good in his back pedal, seems to be able to get in a very smooth back pedal, seems to stay low, get low easily. He also scheme versatile. He's played in both man and zone coverages while he's at Minnesota. And he also has very good natural instincts. The big knocks on him, though, is I've seen him be very overzealous in run support. He is one of those guys that wants to get after the ball carrier. The problem is sometimes he takes a bad angle or uses bad tackling technique, and now it leads to a broken tackle. His turnover production was somewhat inconsistent throughout the college level. I'd like to see him force more turnovers, especially in receptions. I don't know if necessarily that's a lack of press coverage skills. That's quarterbacks throwing away from him not forcing fumbles in that run scheme. I think the big thing, though, is he may face some challenges, especially against elite NFL speed. He's been clocked at around 4.45, 4.46, which is pretty crazy that we think 4.45 is going to have trouble with elite speed. But we talk about Xavier Worthy and Isaiah Bond at 4.2, but it's crazy to think 4.45 10 years ago was a burner, and now 4.45 is going to struggle to keep up with the faster receivers of the world.
Yeah, but Bill's turning into Frankenstein. He just made a wide receiver called Isaiah Worthy. That was impressive.
It was even faster. He runs a 3.9 in the 40. He's even faster.
There you go.
But I think he's very well-rounded. He has a really great skill set. He is a guy that I could see in the top 50 of this class. He is in my top 50, right in the middle of round two. Reminds me a lot of Jair Alexander from the Green Bay Packers. That same really reliable corner, really good in both schemes, man and zone. Doesn't get a whole lot of turnovers, but I think that's because quarterbacks aren't going his way. But with that being said, Randall, what did you see from Justin Walley's tape?
Yeah, I agree with the ball's not going his way. Again, he's another one where I really love his motor and things along those lines. Sideline to sideline, great tackler. And you are right; he likes to be aggressive on it. But to be honest with you, sometimes it works. One really good game for Justin Walley was his Illinois game, where he had the strip fumble that was at the line when it was QB rush, just got right on him, wrapped him up, stripped the ball out. It was very impressive. So I kind of almost I know he needs to improve on it, but I also like how he immediately gravitates to the ball when he's tackling. That's a great NFL thing to have. I do see that he is playing through an injury this year.
Yep.
I do believe is going to require possible surgery. Some people speculate it's a knee sprain. Some people are saying it's a partially torn MCL. So we'll see what happens in the offseason to see what that is. But I don't believe that it should be anything that should change his stock. You're right. His back pedal is super fluid. His hips are great. He's versatile when they use him in the corner, but they also use him in a lot of the blitz packages, which I love. This year he's had 3 pressures and actually hit the quarterback twice and hurried him up once on those 3 pressures. So he's successful on 3, 32 tackles with 7 defensive stops. I mean, he does have 2 interceptions with 4 pass breakups. So I think his turnovers are okay. My best thing for Justin Walley was how much he ascended from 2023 to 2024. I thought he improved much better in 2024 and the way that they're using him and in his coverage. So I think he's ascending, and with his versatility, as you could put him on the inside and you could put him on the outside. And even in that Illinois game, he was going up against Franklin, Bryant, bigger wide receivers, and he held his own on that outside. So you're right. I actually have him in the early 50s as well.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that injury.
Top 50, was he? I don't remember him being in Dane's.
He was not. No, he was not.
He was not. No.
Good.
But I'm glad you brought up that injury too, because his coach PJ Fleck actually announced it was a grade 1 MCL tear.
Oh, it is.
So
okay.
Yeah, it is an MCL tear. I talked with some of the Midwest sources that I've got up in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area, and he announced on one of the radio shows that it was a MCL tear, a partial tear, about 10%, but he's still playing through that. Again, crazy. Partially tear your MCL, but still go out there and produce at the level you're at. That's another box for GMs to just sit there and circle and say, I want that guy on my team, because now you don't have to worry about him missing any time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's funny, because all I saw was coach jargon. I heard it's not bad. He's probable this week. So move on.
Yeah.
Next topic.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Good to know.
Cool. So we have finished. So I want to thank everybody that has been watching the podcast. Thank you very much. Just a reminder, Mrs. R Relevant is a daily draft podcast. We have content on this channel at least once a day. So I appreciate Randall and Bill getting this done, because we have some holidays coming up. We're actually recording this ahead of when it's going to be published, but they didn't want to miss an episode. So I appreciate you guys finding some time. We got this recorded, and a couple days later, all of you are going to be able to listen. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you as always.
Absolutely. Thank you as always, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Happy holidays.